So my name is Linda Killam. I'm the Social Sciences Data Librarian with University Libraries. And in addition to supporting data discovery needs for the social sciences, so I help people find data. Typically it's the census data or other kinds of government data. I also support government information needs as well as the liaison librarian. Like Leah is to kinesiology, I'm the liaison librarian for political science, peace and conflict studies, and history. So my area is primarily social sciences. And as part of that, I also provide support for research data management. So today I'm going to talk about what this means. And I use the term research management when I was advertising this because research management or research data management isn't just about numbers. It's about archiving and keeping track of and maintaining all of the stuff that you're using for your research. And we are going to use that word data very broadly in this presentation. In this presentation, we'll talk about the importance of data management, talk about the data lifecycle, and then I'm going to end out with a discussion of the data management plan and its importance for researchers, especially in the health sciences and sciences. And again, when I'm referring to the word data or using the word data, I'm not just referring to numeric or quantitative files. All of the files that we create, whether they're print or digital, anything that's necessary for your research are research data in some sort and need to be managed appropriately. Again, this is important for everybody, not just people who are working with big grants or those who have data management requirements or those who are working in quantitative areas. I'm sure you've all heard about the data deluge for various reasons, including internet access and stronger computing systems, larger server spaces, all of those kinds of reasons. We have the access to and ability to analyze more data than we've ever had before. It's pretty remarkable how different life is now for me as a data librarian versus when I was in college, which was in the 90s. And we were being asked to analyze data. It's a whole new world, quite frankly. The accessibility of data is pretty remarkable. And we've seen a rise in the use of data in all fields, not just the sciences, and that's where it's pretty common, or the social sciences, but even the humanities. And that's an area that I've been trying to dabble in a little bit and get those researchers to understand that their research is in some ways data alike, and to think about data management principles there too. Why does this matter? We've all lost data. How many of you have lost a computer, just had a computer die on you? Now, natural disaster and storage failure, large-scale failures are rarer, although they can be more catastrophic. Really what it comes down to most often is format obsolescence. That's really the biggest issue that we run into. That people, and this is what happened to me with my master's thesis. I just entered a PhD program and I was looking for my master's thesis, and the original file was in Microsoft Works, which if you've ever used Microsoft Works, it's quite a bear to use now within Microsoft Word, and so I had quite a lot of cleaning up to do in order to rescue that file, which is unfortunate because it took me a lot of time that I did not have at that point to be able to rescue my information. And then also basic human error. We've all overwritten our files. And because of these issues, when it comes to our research, we need to be extra vigilant to manage the data and the files that matter most. And the best thing to do is to do that advanced work of thinking about our data before we start doing the research. Just to give you a couple examples of poor data management. These are a couple of examples. They're a little bit older, but still, and this is pre-data management explosion, before the idea of data management became more and more popular. Just two examples that we have of data that was lost in some case. So Medicare was asking healthcare providers to provide medical records. They realized that there was the error rate was pretty high. I love the one with Alaska. Technician managed to delete the data and backup for the Alaska Oil Revenue Fund. This happens not just to governments and big organizations. This is something that happens to all of us. So before we go on, I want you to take a minute and think, when you think about your projects that you're working, what are your data? how do you gather information? And this could be either the project you're working on, the dissertation if you're working on your dissertation, or a class that you're working on. So if you want to think about a lower scale project, and how you're gathering information for that particular project. What are the pieces of information that are most critical for the project that you're doing right now? What software are you using? What are your practices in backing up your data? So take a moment and just think about what are your data? What are you really working with here?
Hi, Linda. I'm the one that wrote about the master's thesis. I luckily was able to recover stuff, but it was the 11th hour. You know, we were at school working to try to retrieve data from the SPSS files that we had collected, and it, you know, had a system crash, and it was a lot of couple days of putting stuff back together, but luckily we're able to recover it. I have just transitioned from, I was out of school, and I was serving as a clinical coordinator, so I had a lot of student files I was trying to manage. We had previously done everything by paper, and then for accreditation purposes, since their standards and guidelines were moving to an online system, we then were trying to move everything into the digital files, and now I'm at a totally different school, and they don't have anything. So
oh wow,
I know the need of it and the magnitude of it. So it's just, I guess I'm looking for more info and kind of tricks of the trade of where to go to, of how to manage it better.
Mm-hmm. So in this current situation, are they still print primarily, or is it digital files? What are you working with?
They have, so when they do competency-based education, they have to check off all these skills, you know, much like nursing or PA or I'm sorry, I'm an athletic trainer, so, you know, we're trying to manage this for performance feedback, but also for accreditation purposes. And it's just a lot of, they're using like some notebook right now, spiral bound.
Oh!
And it's just, you can't do anything with it except show somebody in person, hey, I did this.
Yeah.
It's just archaic now. So just looking at how to use the newer apps, technology, different things to create better tools to assess, but then also where do we keep it once it is all assessed?
Right, okay. That's great. Yeah, so I mean that's a great example, and actually there's a wonderful book that I would suggest you, Andy, I would suggest you look at that I'll talk about a little bit later. And she actually talks about that that very issue of managing kind of paper and digital at the same time, and gives some tips for what to do, especially if there is a paper format or options that you could use for switching. You know, the trick is that it really depends on, it can be field specific what you should be using. And she talks a little bit about that, there may be certain expectations that, so for in the School of Health and Human Sciences here at UNCG, a lot of them use REDCap for data collection, whereas other groups may use something else. So in terms of the actual tools, it may differ depending on the field that you're in. But we could talk a little bit about that as well if you want at the end. What we're going to talk about mostly today is it's very the kind of the big picture, and that's one of the things that all the research data management people try and encourage researchers to do, is to step back a little bit and think big picture before they start getting into tools and start getting too specific on the way they're collecting things. Just really some basic reasons why you want to manage your data. And these are pretty obvious, very obvious reasons. But first off is just keeping yourself organized, tracking processes for reproducibility if necessary, and in most cases it would be potentially necessary that you might need to reproduce something. This is not just for yourself, but also for others, so that others could reproduce your. There's also the question of better control versions, so the version control is a big issue. Formatting your data for reuse, so if you do expect that other people might want to reuse your data, and then which leads to the ability to share it. You can't really share data very effectively unless it's properly managed. So if you do have sharing requirements, or if you want to share your data, for some reason, then it has to be properly managed in order to do that. And then there's just the basic thing that you can, as a researcher, gain credibility and recognition for your research efforts. The data community is trying to promote data. It's not just about your scholarly publications, but it is also about your data, and that can gain you recognition as well. As a librarian, I like to think about the life cycle model. So this is the way I think about research and research data. And it's never this simple. This is very simple and nice. My primary goal ultimately is to help people plan so well that then create well-documented data that when they are finished with a project, they can still understand it and easily access their files even 10 years later. So having something that's so well planned out that they'll be able to go back to it themselves and maybe even use it or share it with a mentee or a graduate student, that's really my goal. Also, because I help people with data discovery, I appreciate the reasons why we have well-documented data, because I want people to be able to find secondary data so that they can analyze it and use that for their own project. And that's my goal. So what we're going to be talking about today in this life cycle model is mostly that planning part. Where this usually comes out, why we usually end up talking about this, is because of what's called the DMP. And this is a data management plan. That's what DMP stands for. How many of you have heard of a data management plan or have come across them recently? Yeah, so data management plans became kind of common parlance in research world, especially with academic librarians and academics. Only recently. And the reason why was because of the requirement by the NSF that all grant proposals include a data management plan. And that was in 2011. So they required that these grant proposals include a formal document that's usually about 2 pages, 3 pages at most, that in general answer 2 questions. 1, what are your data? A description of the data. And 2, what is the plan for managing your data? How are you going to actually manage it? And so this is really, it's a process that outlines what you're doing with your data before you start the project, during the project collection, and after you complete your research. And it does help you to ensure that your data is safe because you're thinking through that collection process. And it is required by most funding agencies now. Federal funding agencies as well as some private granting foundations will require a data management plan. They're spending a lot of money and they expect to have some access to that data in the future. So I like the DM not just because of the fact that funding agencies require it, because it's something that can help you as a researcher. And so what we're going to do tonight is go through and talk about what it is and why you would do this and then what it is. So why would you do this? Well, first off, if you do the advanced thinking about planning for your data, it's going to save you time in the long run. There's less reorganization later. It helps to increase your research efficiency because you're not thinking through the process every single time you do something. So if you, and especially, I think it works really well with groups. If you're working in a research group of some sort and you don't have an articulated plan for how you're going to manage your research, you are going to have issues with organizational issues. You're going to have issues with efficiency, and so it's something that this advanced thinking can help with those efficiency issues. Again, it will help you understand your data, you understand your data, or others understand it in the future. It will make it easier to preserve. It can prevent duplication of effort. It can definitely increase visibility of people's research. Like I said before, it's especially critical for projects with multiple people involved. If you don't have one of these, or some sort of these, when you have a project with multiple people, it can be a lot harder. So what I'm going to do is talk you through the parts of a data management plan and the major components that are typically seen in these. Even though this is required by the funding agencies, and this is something that groups should be doing, this is also something that you can do on your own for your own projects. I actually co-edited a book recently with an author who was in Canada, and so everything we were doing in our coordination was remote. So we wrote out a data management plan for our co-editing of that book. We had about 20 authors who were all over the world, so we had a lot of coordinating that we had to do. And without that data management plan and that advanced thinking on how we were going to organize our files, and in this case it was just Microsoft Word files, we weren't going to be able to do an effective job on on writing and editing that book. I also have a data management plan for my teaching files and my presentation files, a way that I save things, a way that I go through and purge things, and this is all written out and articulated. It may seem a little bit like overkill, but I think it's important for me because I did destroy my master's thesis and not have it. So when it comes to the parts of a data management plan, these are the components that you typically see requirements. So this is actually coming from our closest model is NSF, but others look similar to this. So the first part is to articulate any information about the data inputs, about the products that you're creating, and the format in which your data is going to be stored during the project and long term. And again, this is a written document. This is all written down in these different parts. Just a few of the things that are involved in this. One is the description of the data that's to be produced. So in the case of Andy, in the case of your example, you have the spiral-bound notebook.
Yeah, I guess observational, but it's performance, and some areas have some performance indicators that you need to describe, but mostly it's a check-off system. So yeah, I guess observational would be the best way to describe it.
Well, that sounds like you at least are starting that process of thinking through what kind of data that you're looking at, right? And not all of these steps are things that you would do for every single, like for some data management plan that you're creating for your particular group, right? You can skip over these depending on how things are useful to you. But I think what is important here is that we're very thoughtful about all the things that we're collecting that are part of this. For instance, people may not often think about images, or if you're writing a book, you may not often think about the fact that you are going to have to control in addition to each, or dissertation. That is another example of this, where you have each of those Microsoft Word files, you have all of your SPSS files, you have all of your image files that you might be creating of your graphs. There's so many things that you need to be aware of, and at least understand that articulate that those are the things that are going to be input for your research. And that's really what it's doing here. The other one is how data will be acquired. So this might be something, so if it's observational data and you're sitting down, you're watching a student, you're working with them, or are you combining that with data from other sources? Also, in terms of thinking about your situation, if the reason why you have the spiral-bound notebooks is because of ease of use, if that's easier to use in the field, in a sense, then that's probably why people are using that format. Just, and I have another fun example of this is recently, and I saw a presentation by some archaeologists who are talking about a new data input system that they're using, and they were talking about how they tested out iPads, but iPads were too fragile, and so that they had to be very thoughtful about which kind of tablet system they were going to use for this data input, because the iPads were too fragile to use in the field on our archaeological digs. So they actually switched to a different tablet that was a little bit more sturdy they could do the input on. So just thinking through those issues that you might have now. And then also how data will be processed. So what software are you using, SPSS? What workflows do you have for processing the data? And then the really important one for me is this 1.4 is file format. What are the file formats you're saving ultimately in? We have to be very careful about, even though Excel and Microsoft Word, we feel like they're going to be around forever. I thought Microsoft Works would be around for a lot longer than it was. But we need to justify the formats we're using and understand that there are certain formats that might be better than others. If we are saving something in Excel, we might also want to have a backup that's in .csv. If you're saving something in Word, you might also want to have a backup that's in either a PDF or text file. So thinking through those file formats. And the DMPs do typically require that there be formats that are archivable in the future. And if there's a reason why you want to save something in a particular file, just making sure you understand the justification that you have for using that particular file. Another example with spiral-bound notebooks that I'd mentioned this book earlier that's really good if you are interested in this topic. She talks about lab notebooks, which are often used, are really common in sciences, and a lot of times these are still print. I mean, that was the way in my lab classes, it was always a print notebook. The process you might want to go through in towards digitizing that notebook so that you have record in case the notebook is ever destroyed. So just being a little more upfront about that. And then naming conventions. I try to be really good about this, but it can be difficult. Naming conventions are something that tend to be very personal. We have a way we think about naming our files so that we understand what we have, but sometimes naming something in a very common way, a way that's not going to be understandable in 5 years is problematic. So being very, especially for important files, things like maybe your presentation files, your chapter files, those things that really matter, thinking through how you're going to name things. And actually writing that out. And then quality assurance and control during collections. So what is the process of sample collection and analysis? What are you really doing to make sure that you follow those? And then the final one is what are your data? So just existing data. What are the origins? Have you collected? Have other people collected them? Will the data that you're combining be combined with existing data? What is the relationship? How do they correlate? And then the final one I think is really important too is how is the data going to be managed in the short term. So again, version control. This is very important for groups, making sure you have articulated what versioning, how you're going to do version control. The worst example of this I think is lessened a little bit now because of things like Google Drive, but when you're working on a common document with someone and you're emailing them back and forth, having some agreed upon system for saying this is how we will indicate that this is the most recent file of whatever we're working on. And then backing up, having a backup strategy is so key. There is the backup strategy we promote is 3-2-1 backup strategy. So 3 total copies of your data, 2 of which are local but on different media, so different devices, and at least 1 copy off-site. And this is a wonderful idea, but it's not something that we all do because it takes time and effort, but it is very important that we try to do something that mimics this. The 2 of which are local is the most commonly violated part of this because we tend to think that if we have a backup on our computer and then a backup maybe on like something like a thumb drive, that's enough. Thumb drives are notoriously unstable, and we should be very careful about saving things just on thumb drives. So I would encourage you, if you haven't already, go ahead and get one of those external drives that you and read a lot about it to make sure it's a really good quality one. And then 1 copy off-site, we tend to think that if we just save it to something like Box or Dropbox, that's good enough, but we need to be really careful. One, I mean, you're trusting a service to provide access to that, so if that's the only place you're saving it, it can be a little bit problematic. And I know all of you were, how many of you were on Twitter when the attack happened? Was it Monday? And some of the services, our Box accounts went down here at UNCG, so we couldn't access anything that was saved on Box for a little while. So be just careful of thinking about how you will back up your data, the different devices that you will save on, and then how often you will back up your data. And who's responsible in a group situation, who's responsible for backing up that data in the group. The next couple of parts, I'm just going to go through a little bit quicker. Number 1, I think, is the most important one for us to be thinking about at this stage. The other components are things that really matter for when you start to go share your data. Metadata, so this is the contextual details about your data set. It tells you what's most important for understanding and using your data set, all of the details that are part of that. And you'll have access to the slides later on, but you can go and look at different kinds of metadata out there. Sometimes the metadata is collected in the instruments you might use. If you're not using instruments, though, thinking through the kinds of things people will need to understand in order to use your data set. That's really what metadata is. So, for example, just any details that are meaningful to make your data meaningful, information on how the metadata is created. Are you using lab notebooks? Are you going to hand create it? Is it auto-saved on an instrument? And then what are the standards for the community that you are in? Again, this is something that becomes very important when you go to share your data sets, but it's something that you might want to start thinking about as you're creating any kind of data or working on a project. The third one is policies for access, sharing, and reuse. For most of the federal funding agencies, you are required to share, if you can. If it's not a requirement that it's not an expectation that you would share any data that's proprietary or private, but there is an expectation that you will attempt to make a good faith effort in sharing. And so it's something that needs to be thought about if you plan to do this. You never know when your data might be useful for someone else in another field. And again, if you want to share it without good documentation, there's no way to do that. So obligations, you might be obligated in the future to share your data. You might have institutional obligations to share your data. But the thing you need to think about is how long you would want to share it, when, how access can be gained. Those kinds of questions are really the key parts of this. And then any privacy issues with data sharing. Are there intellectual property right concerns? Who owns the copyright for the data? There are institutional policies as well as funding agency policies that may play into that. Again, who intended future users of the data. And then finally, the big one for us, for data librarians, is citation, how the data should be cited. In the past, data was not cited effectively, and by this I mean mostly numeric data. So people would say that they used the census summary file, and that was it. Just in their article, they wouldn't actually give a full citation of the data and the version that they were using. So we are trying to promote people to use actual citations for their data sets that they're using, so that people who want to go back and try to replicate their research can use the actual data set that they were using. And in most cases, if you have a grant, they will require that you have some kind of persistent citation. The fourth one is long-term storage and data management. This is not just important for research projects, but also important for you. If you did want to archive your data, where could you archive it? Where would it be preserved? What are the community standards, community archives? In the social sciences, we have archives like what's called ICTSR. Sciences, they have things like Dryad, so there's different places that people might share their data. And then also the policies of those archives would be written into the data management plan. And then finally, data management plans have budgetary concerns. And there's always a budget section, because there are upfront costs to doing this. So if you are creating a project, if you are starting on your dissertation, one of the first things you should do is go and buy your external drive that you're going to use to back up your data or back up your dissertation files. That costs money. And so these DMPs, you can actually write in a budget to cover those costs, such as storage, fees for archiving, the personnel fees that might go in for IT management, those kind of things. So thinking through that process in advance for a DMP is very important, so that you can anticipate costs in the future. So this just goes through those same things, so all the software and personnel costs that might be. So that's just to give you a taste of the data management plan as it's defined by federal funding agencies, but also to help you think of how this might work for a personal project, a project that you are doing. The slide that you see now, I'm not going to read this, but these are the NSF DMP requirements and the way they're written. And you can see it's very similar. It's not exactly like what we were talking about, but it's very similar to the points that we were going through. All of the funding agencies, the federal funding agencies, have some similar format when it comes to the DMP requirement. Are there any questions or comments at this point? So students do own their data, yes. Students, unless you're working on a project with a researcher and it's their lab, and in that case, there should be some kind of agreement where you can use the data while you're here, or you might be able to take parts of the data with you when you leave, that you should have some kind of articulated agreement with your the lab professor. But yes, if you have your own project and you've collected the data, it's your own data, and you can leave UNCG with that without any problems. It's the researchers who are working here who are paid by the university where it's a little bit different. Any other questions or comments?
Linda, I had a question about going back when you were talking about the 3-2-1 process or method. I had a question about, I guess I found myself in some situations where I can't remember which version is the primary one because several places, and I used to work at a state school in North Carolina, so we had um, some stuff that was in like a select survey was a survey form. We had some data there. We had other things that were Word documents in like SharePoint files, and then we had some that were in Dropbox. And we accounted for everything, but it almost got to be like you had to literally draw a map to where everything was. And I only really understood the impact of this when I left that position to go back to school. Then I had to, transition over and basically teach someone how to do what I was managing, and somebody said, "Holy cow, I didn't realize you were managing all this stuff." I said, "Yeah, and teaching and coordinating and all this other stuff."
Wow.
So what would you advise, students or employees to do with regards to, like, you mentioned Dropbox may not be, I don't know, what do you suggest?
Yeah, that's a great question. No, I do use, Dropbox is wonderful. Box is wonderful. Those are great resources to use, especially Box because we have access to it through the campus and it's basically unlimited. So those are great resources. The thing is using those as your working files is one thing, but I would encourage you to think through the backup plan that you would do maybe once a week or every 2 weeks. I wouldn't save things. I have to admit, I have to do that same thing where I have to save things in multiple places because of, mostly for me, it's because of the sharing issues. So we tend to share things through Google Drive, but all of my files are on Box. So I'm saving in multiple places because of that. But I think the important thing for you, the work that you're doing, and it's most important for you to just make sure that you're backing that up someplace and considering that a backup place and not an active storage place.
Yeah, right now I'm backing things up on an external hard drive, so it sounds like that's the right approach.
Yeah, and well, in the backup, the 321 thing, so they would actually say 2 external places. So what I do every 2 weeks on my personal computer is I save up on my external drive and I back up everything that's on Box. I back up to my external drive and I back up to my computer, and that's 2 separate devices.
Okay.
So the third, the off-site place is going to be Dropbox for me. Although some people would say that that's not a true off-site storage place because of the issues with that. But I think that, honestly, I think that is fine to do that. The reason why you want the 2 devices is just because of the fact that if the external drive goes bust, there's one place that it exists. So the thing is, though, is making sure that you have, first off, making sure those are the backups, not the active file directories. And 2, writing it down somewhere. I know that sounds like overkill, but I think for having it written that this is what you're going to do weekly or bi-weekly or even monthly.
Into like a calendar reminder, or
yeah, a calendar reminder, or even if you have a to-do app that you use. I use
in the habit of doing that more regularly, routinely.
Because like on something like Google Cal, you could just set up as a repeating reminder that has that information in the note field.
Right.
Something like Remember the Milk, you could just do a repeating to-do that always has that in the note field too. Do you know Remember the Milk? It's a really great to-do site, like it's a to-do application, but it's a website. And there's a lot like that are applications for creating to-do lists. But yeah, like I said, I think having it just written out for yourself so you have that reminder of what it is you're doing is the most important thing. But having one place that you're really using as an active directory is going to be helpful if you can, like as best as you can. What I do for my big projects that I'm working on, like the book, I use a thing called Evernote where you can have lots of notebooks. I created a note that just it's a data management plan for my projects. And so I go through and just write out how I'm going to manage that project, where I'm going to keep the backups, the active files, what the naming conventions are going to be, all of those things. And I think it takes time on the front end, but it saves time in the long run, so you're not thinking through that process constantly. The last few slides on here are just some tools that I wanted to make you aware of. This one you probably wouldn't use for a long time. unless you had to create data management plans for particular funding agencies. But DMP tool is something just to keep in the back of your mind if you ever want to apply for a federal grant. It helps walk you through the process of creating a DMP. And gives the current requirements for the federal for the agency. Also, we have a data archive option at UNCG, and most institutions now are offering something like this. So if you had numeric data that you wanted to share, right now this is mostly for faculty and researchers, but we are looking at the possibility of allowing students to archive their data with their dissertations. And the nice thing about this and this movement to doing this is that it gives you a potentially free option for archiving your data and sharing your data. Therefore, you're being in compliance with the requirements of potential grants. The nice thing about this too is it does give you a citation. So all of the information is user provided, but it will generate a citation based on that user information. And it's a really great way to do this. And again, lots of institutions are coming up with some kind of data archiving option like this. And this is just another screen of what it looks like where somebody's put in an SPSS file. An XLS file. You can also do SPSS files in here. And then there is a guide with a lot more resources than what we can go over here. This is the Data Management Lib Guide. It's uncg.libguides.com/RDM. And there's lots of resources on here. There's lots of things here, including the slides that we're using today. So if you want to go back and look at it. There's also on the tab Y Data Management, the link to that book that I mentioned. So this is by Kristen Briney. It just came out recently, and it's called Data Management for Researchers. And it is fantastic. It's really one of the best things I've read about research data management. It also has resources on creating data management plans, including a tutorial on DMP tool, data storage tips, just a few, as well as links out to other resources, and then some information on sharing and archiving data, and just a few of the archives that you could archive your data at, as well as citations for how to cite data appropriately. So this is just a few places that you might look at in addition to, and there's lots of links there for more resources as well. And then I also do secondary data discovery support, so if that's something that's interesting to you, it's just finding data, and so I support people who are finding statistics or data sources who are looking for census data, all kinds of things. So if you're looking for a particular data, any kind of numeric data, please let me know. And then at the end of this, there's lots of research or lots of library guides and support guides out there in the world right now. This is a very big topic. There's a couple that I'll point out. Data One has a really great website, but also the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research has a really good site on data management, so it's something you're interested in. And that is it for me. Clinical tracking software systems. So Leah mentioned something that...
She might be referencing eValue.
Yeah.
And there's some newer ones that have just come out, and the school that I'm at in Virginia right now teaching, they've migrated to something called A-Track, which is new. It's for athletic training. It's supposed to be better aligned with our accreditation standards, and so there are some of those types of systems out there, but they're still primitive. I mean, we still have issues of, it's really just the outer shell. It's not the detailed information in some of the clinical competencies that I'm looking for. So I've had to create my own. And at the last institution, our program director wasn't taking the bait to try to put funding towards it. It was more of a, we don't really have the money for this right now. We need to, focus elsewhere. And but it's a lot of work to manage all of this. And if at the end of the day it comes down to what you can show to your accreditors that you're meeting their standards, I mean, it's, there's got to be a better way. So it's more of just looking at that and kind of, I definitely wish I would have known more about this concept of a DMP 7 years ago.
I think all of us do.
File folders and big, file cabinets that did all that work for us.
Yeah.
In a digital world, we don't necessarily have those like automatic structures. We have to think about them like with a purpose, intently. And I definitely could see this as something that could be weaved into a dissertation idea. I'm the first year of doctoral school, so I've got a long way to go.
Oh, cool.
But I want to start thinking about it now because I did have that weird situation with my master's thesis, which I thought I was going to have a heart attack at a very early age because it was a lot of data that we collected on live patients. It was empirical evidence, very basic science research, and the thought of having to go back and, we implanted thermocouples into people's skin. The thought of going back and having to ask people to redo that was just mortifying.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I now know the value of, just trying to keep all this in check. But it's a diligence thing, it's just like brushing your teeth every day. You gotta, create it, but then do the extra steps to kind of maintain it. And then the sharing is a whole nother layer to it, which I found, it's great for me to manage it all, but then if my partners can't see it or there isn't some interface, like coming to UNCG and doing the online doctoral program has actually got me up to speed much faster on Google Drive than I thought I would be at this point. And I wish I would have been using that in the years, a couple years ago, because that seems to be a lot more effective for doing like you're drafting and multiple people are trying to put input into it, because Dropbox doesn't really let you do that as well. And that was the missing component for me is, okay, I'd share this document and someone will want to input data into it, like maybe it was an Excel sheet or something. They'd have to download it, put the data in, re-upload it, and then we got lost in the version, which version of it is this, and is the most recent info in your version or my version, and how did we code it, and you think, gosh, I don't want to tell somebody else how to label their materials, but it's absolutely paramount that you do it, or else you just get lost in the system. And then you get frustrated because you spend that much time trying to unravel what you spent all this time putting together. So, maybe there's a feature that I could come up with a e-value or a track system one day for data management just for our area.
That's what the archaeology example I was giving. It was just a researcher who trying to manage her students on a site, and so she came up with a system that then was adopted by most of the, a lot of archaeologists. So yeah, that's definitely something that's a lot of people or researchers are looking at these kinds of questions. And it's so critical, especially if you are going to be managing people and their input or the work that they're doing for you. But yeah, no, Google Drive's a wonderful one. It's definitely one that I have to say I get lazy about. So even though, we have a wonderful system here at UNCG, and I'm not a paranoid person, I don't want to give you that impression, but if there are files that are critical to you, make sure you're, once they're at the final stage, they were taking them out and backing them up in your process. But yeah, it's a lifesaver compared to the emailing files back and forth. So that was it for me. If there's anything else you wanted to talk about or any questions you had, or
this is kind of a side question, and Leah, you may be able to help too if you can hear me. So for Dr. Gill's class, been writing a lot and citing, the articles that we're reading. And for the life of me, I know that there's a trick to getting the citation so I don't have to literally type it in every single time and, sweat over do I have the comma in the right spot, and is this italicized? Okay. I was like, I know we went over this in the orientation, and I can't remember where to find this little magic trick. I was able to do it for some of them, but then others, I don't know if it was just the way it was shared from Dr. Gill to us. So I just go to that website and download it?
So Zotero is one system you can use, as Leah says. So there's other sources you could use to do this. Zotero is a citation manager that you download. It depends on if you're using, if you're a Chrome user or if you're a Firefox user. There's a Firefox add-in that you can use. There's also a Chrome add-in you can use. There's a standalone version. So it's very flexible and a nice way to help with citation management. In addition to the citation management part, it also has an add-in that you could use for Microsoft Word. And that installation is another step if you're using Firefox to add that in. But it's wonderful because it will help you cite your sources in the format you're wanting to cite it in.
And if you're really good at, writing it out and knowing the differences,
yeah.
Using the Purdue OWL website a lot, but I'm spending way too much time, formatting my citations and, need to be worried about the content of what I wrote.
Right, and that's why, especially you're the ideal person to start using Zotero because you're just starting your dissertation program or your doctoral program. So I would encourage you to take a look at it, and either you can make an appointment with me or Leah, and we can sit you down and work. Well, I guess we could Skype and talk about getting it set up.
I have a MacBook Pro, so I use the Safari browser.
Oh, you can do it for Safari too.
Okay.
Yeah, I use Mac. I'm a Mac user at home too, and it works fine. It just looks a little different than the Firefox version, but for the most part, it's the same.
Okay.
But if you go to that website and where it says download now, when you go in, you'll see the Zotero standalone. That's what you'll use, and then there's a Safari extension.
Okay. Perfect.
So yeah, it works great.
Only halfway in the semester.
Yeah, well, now's the time because you're going to be, you don't want to lose. It's not just about citing the sources in Microsoft Word or whatever. It's also about keeping track of things that you've read from your first semester to you, and that's more important, honestly, to be able to create a library for yourself is really key.
Okay. Well, that sounds pretty easy enough.
Yes, definitely.
Gonna work on that. Thanks, Leah. Appreciate your help, and you were great during our orientation. So I feel like I'm in good hands here.
All right. Well, thank you for coming, guys, and just feel free to email me if you have questions. And I love talking about tools. So if you have any needs when it comes to tools, just email me, and I can think through what might work.